Lair of the Lansing Leprechauns, chapters 13, 14, and 15. Chapter 13. Time stopped. Well, not really. I'm sure that time rolled on and seconds ticked past just like they always did. But to me, at that very moment, it felt like time really had stopped. Standing there in the gloom of the underground cavern, it was as though we were in our own world, our own little bubble outside of the universe, in our own dimension of a space-time where we were on our own and the rest of the galaxy whirled by. And Cornell, Bentley, and I were all alone. Well, not quite alone. Because in our own little bubble of space-time, there was a tiny man standing before us. A little person who could only be what anyone would have called a leprechaun. Slowly, I raised my arm and looked at my hands and wrists. They were covered in gold dust. It was on my shirt, my pants, my shoes. I looked at Cornell. Gold dust powdered his face, his black hair, and his clothing. Even Bentley had gold dust covering him. The fine granules frosted his fur. It was on his head, his face, and his nose. There was even gold dust on his whiskers. It was as though someone had poured a bag of gold flour over our heads. But no, not a bag of gold flour. It had been a small gold coin. A gold coin that had burst above our heads when the little man had tossed it in the air. Cornell looked every bit as confused as I felt. What had just happened? Why had the leprechaun tossed the gold coin? How had it burst? And why were we now covered in fine gold dust? What did you do that for? Cornell asked. He wasn't angry, but he sounded confused and perplexed. After he spoke, his mouth hung open. He raised his arms to look at them, turning his palms over and back, still amazed at the gold powder covering him. The leprechaun continued to stare at us with huge, wide eyes. It was as if he was waiting for us to do something, waiting for something to happen. And then something most certainly did happen. My skin began to tingle. My eyelids buzzed. My nose itched. Even my hair seemed alive. It felt as if each follicle was filled with electricity. Cornell felt it too. He looked at his arms and then he looked at me. Do you feel that? He asked. I nodded in confirmation, but I didn't say anything. Even Bentley must have been feeling the odd sensation, because he whimpered and shook his head. His ears made rapid, snapping sounds. All the while, the little man stood where he was, watching, waiting. The tingling sensation grew stronger and stronger. It wasn't painful. It just felt weird. But the feeling grew, stronger and stronger, stronger still. The leprechaun began to grin. His eyes narrowed, his face twisted into a horrible-looking mask. He knew something we didn't. He knew something awful was about to happen to us. And it did. Chapter 14. Everything around us began to blur, and I couldn't focus on any one thing. Once I tried on my dad's glasses, everything became fuzzy. When I took them off, my gaze sharpened. I put them on, the same thing happened. I told my dad that I couldn't believe he wore them. He laughed and told me that without him, his vision was just as blurry as when I had them on. He said his glasses corrected that, and that when I got older, there was a good chance I would need glasses too. He laughed and told me it was part of the aging process. I told him that if that was the case, I wasn't ever going to get old. He laughed at that, of course. The same thing was happening to Cornell. Hey, what's going on? He asked. I don't know, I said. Everything is fuzzy and I can't focus. Not far away, the little man became nothing but a blob with no features, but he hadn't changed. It was just that I could no longer make him out. Even Bentley was uncomfortable. Something was happening to him, too. He whimpered a couple of times and nuzzled my leg. I put my hand on his head, but I don't think it was much comfort to him. But if that wasn't weird enough... Fern, Cornell said. Fern, is the same thing happening to you? I think so, I stammered. Everything is blurry. But it's changing, too, Cornell said. Everything is starting to shift and move. As soon as Cornell spoke those words, I began to see what he was talking about. Things around us, mostly the walls, floor, and ceiling, were moving, twisting slowly, turning, changing shape. It was really strange. I grabbed Cornell's arm so I would have something to hang on to. And as things began to shift and change, I began to feel different, too. I felt lighter, buoyant, as though I were floating in water or being slowly lifted from the ground by a helium balloon. At my side, Bentley whimpered. Then a voice. It came from the blurry little man, the leprechaun. Don't be frightened, he said. You'll be okay. Just give it another minute. Hearing his tiny, squeaky voice was surprising, just as surprising as what was happening. But hearing his words did not provide any comfort. I didn't like the strange feeling of being off balance, the way things around us were blurring and changing, twisting and shifting. It might help if you close your eyes, the little man said in his odd, tiny man voice. Close your eyes tightly, and I will tell you when to open them again. I was reluctant, but I did what the small man said. But when I closed my eyes, my balance became even worse. I gripped Cornell's arm tighter and held fast. Ow, I heard him say. Sorry, I replied, but I'm scared. I don't know what's going on. I don't either, Cornell replied. I held Bentley's leash tightly as I wanted to hang on to him in case he became frightened and wanted to run off. He whimpered once more, but he didn't try to flee. It won't be long now, I heard the leprechaun say. It won't be long. We waited. I held Cornell's arm in one hand, and in the other I held Bentley's leash. Waiting. Okay, the leprechaun said. Open your eyes. I did. I stopped breathing. Never in a million years did I expect to see what I was now looking at. Chapter 15. Cornell's gasp was so loud that it scared me. It was as though we had traveled to somewhere completely different, as if the mere act of closing our eyes had caused us to travel to a different location, a different world. When I say different, I mean it was different in ways that I would have never dreamed possible. The only thing that remained the same was the leprechaun. Everything else around us had changed. The tunnel was gone. The cement floor beneath our feet was gone. We were now standing in a field of tall grass. A few strands of tall trees grew not far away. There were no homes, no structures. Above us, instead of a ceiling, was a wide blue sky. Okay, Cornell said quietly. What just happened? What's going on? Where are we? Lansing? I was still holding tightly to Bentley's leash. He was turning his head, cocking it from side to side. Even he seemed confused at this change of scenery and surroundings. Don't be frightened, the leprechaun said. You're safe for now. What just happened? I asked. I turned and looked all around. It was impossible, but it was as though we had traveled to another place. We hadn't moved an inch. Rather, it was our surroundings that had changed completely. It was as though we had closed our eyes and woken within a dream, if something like that was even possible. What happened? I asked, repeating Cornell's question. Where are we? It's quite simple, really, the leprechaun replied. You are seeing things as they really are in another world. Another world? I said. Another world, the leprechaun replied, nodding his head. There are many other worlds besides your own, he said. Worlds within worlds that are very different from yours. He said these words as though we were supposed to understand, but I did not know what he was talking about. I only had more questions. But what happened to where we live? Cornell asked. What happened to our home? Oh, it's still very much there, the little man replied, but you're not there, not anymore. Then I noticed something else. We were no longer covered in gold dust. Only moments before, it had covered our clothing and our exposed skin. Now it was gone. It was even gone from Bentley's fur. Is this like some other sort of different dimension? I asked. I'd heard about things like that, but mostly from science fiction books and movies where people traveled to another dimension, another place in time without really going anywhere. They were in the same spot as they'd always had been, but in a separate reality. I didn't know how all that stuff was supposed to work, and I wasn't sure if it was even possible until now. And I did not like the feeling I was getting from this new place. I was sure something was wrong, that we shouldn't be here. Well, I said, it's been nice visiting, but I think we have to go. If you could show us how to get... The little man laughed. Go, he said. Go where? Home? Again, he laughed. That's funny. You're not going home, he said. You're not going anywhere.